To the Galactic Coalition, the Void Weaver was an apocalyptic god, a multi-kilometer horror that ate stars, crushed elite dreadnoughts like aluminum cans, and forced an entire galactic sector to accept their absolute extinction. But to the crew of the human salvage ship the Ouroboros, it wasn't a god. It was 82% pure, unrefined platinum iridium matrix, and their corporate taxes were due next Tuesday. Act 1, The Dying Light of Xylos. The sirens inside the central command hub of Aegis Prime did not wail. They moaned. It was a low, structural vibration that resonated through the floorboards, a sound designed by the architects of the Galactic Coalition to signal only one thing: total, irreversible planetary extinction. Grand Admiral Xyler stood at the precipice of the command dais, his four upper mandibles twitching in a rhythmic, anxious click. Below him, the hololithic tactical map of the Xylos system was bleeding red.
Report.
Xyler commanded, his voice hollow.
And do not soften the mathematics, Sub-Commander.
The insectoid officer at the sensor console didn't look up. To look up was to face the reality of their doom.
The third dreadnought line has ceased to exist, Admiral. The Indomitable, the Vanguard of Light, and the Star Hammer vanished. Their structural hulls were not melted or shattered. The entity simply pulled them into its gravitational wake. They were compressed into dense spheres of scrap metal before they could even discharge their primary antimatter cannons.
Xyler closed his secondary eyelids. The third line was the pride of the Coalition. Each dreadnought was a kilometer long, shielded by layers of localized dark matter matrices, and crewed by thousands of the galaxy's elite. Extinguished in seconds.
The civilian transport ships?
Xyler asked softly.
60% have cleared the inner system's jump gates.
The sub-commander replied, his carapace dull with stress.
But the gravity well is expanding. The Void Weaver is feeding on the system's secondary star, Xylos B. As the star's mass is consumed, the localized hyperspace lanes are collapsing. Within 40 minutes, the remaining 40 million civilians will be trapped in the gravity web. They will burn when the entity ignites the system core.
Xyler looked back at the main viewport. Even without the magnification sensors, the nightmare was visible to the naked eye. The Void Weaver was a localized cosmic catastrophe. It spanned nearly 3,000 kilometers from its central mass to the tips of its primary feeding tendrils. It did not look entirely organic, nor did it look mechanical. It was an oily, shifting mass of hyperdense matter, blacker than the vacuum surrounding it, surrounded by a swirling, violent halo of stolen stellar fire. Massive arcs of bioplasma, each the width of a continent, danced across its undulating hide. It was an apex predator of the cosmos, an ancient deity that treated entire civilizations as mere fuel stations.
Open a sector-wide broadcast.
Xyler whispered. He straightened his ceremonial armor, though it felt absurdly heavy now.
Let them hear the final directive.
The channel opened with a high-pitched hiss that echoed across millions of escape pods, civilian cruisers, and dying military outposts.
To the citizens of the voltaic sector.
Xyler began, his voice broadcasting across the light years.
This is Grand Admiral Xyler. The math of survival has run its course. Our shields are nothing to the darkness. Our weapons are but sparks against a furnace. I initiate Protocol Omega. Abandon your posts. Flee in whatever direction the void allows. We have met the end of our history. May the ancestors forgive us for our weakness.
Across the system, the chaotic exodus turned into a mad, desperate scramble. Elegant, aerodynamic ships collided with one another in the panic to reach the remaining stable jump coordinates. The galaxy was crying out in terror, turning its back on the dying system, leaving Xylos B to be drained into a lifeless, cold cinder. Then, the primary sensor array let out a loud, harsh, discordant chime. It wasn't the sound of a ship exploding. It was the sound of a massive warp rupture.
Admiral.
The sensor officer shouted, his mandibles snapping open in shock.
A massive vessel has just dropped out of slipspace. Coordinates 0.4 from the entity's primary feeding maw.
Xyler lunged forward, gripping the railing of the dais.
A coalition reinforcement? Who is foolish enough to ignore Protocol Omega?
No, Admiral. The transponder code is unlisted in the Galactic Registry. It is a human vessel.
Act 2, the working class of the cosmos. The tactical display zoomed in on the newcomer, and the entire command bridge of Aegis Prime fell into a bewildered silence. The ship did not possess the graceful curves of the voltaic cruisers, nor the sharp, aggressive angles of the Imperial war barges. It was a colossal, brutalist block of unpainted, industrial-grade steel. It looked like a multi-kilometer tectonic plate had been ripped from a planet, fitted with massive chemical and nuclear thrusters, and hurled into the void. Its hull was a patchwork of weld marks, heavy blast shielding, and deep, ancient asteroid scars. Written across its bow in giant, fading white block letters was the designation, UNRS Ouroboros. And beneath it, a smaller, glowing neon sign read, Soul Salvage and Heavy Industries, we haul the void.
Is it a super dreadnought?
Zyler muttered, squinting at the sensor data.
Look at the kinetic density of that hull. It has no energy shielding, but the physical armor is thicker than our planetary bunkers.
Hailing them now, Admiral.
The comms officer called out.
They are answering.
The primary hololith split, and the image of a human appeared. The alien officers braced themselves, expecting to see a grim, battle-hardened Terran warlord covered in combat medals, ready to declare a glorious, suicidal final stand. Instead, they were greeted by a man who looked like he had been awake for 3 consecutive planetary rotations. He was wearing a greasy, oil-stained jumpsuit with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He had thick, dark circles under his eyes, a rough patch of stubble on his jaw, and he was holding a dented metallic mug that wafted steam into the air. In his other hand, he held a digital stylus, frantically tapping against a cracked tablet screen. The human took a long, loud sip from his mug, let out a deep, rattling sigh, and rubbed the back of his neck.
Yeah, Aegis Command. This is Captain Marcus of the Ouroboros.
The human said, his tone flat, exhausted, and completely devoid of military discipline.
We're receiving your Protocol Omega broadcast. Look, buddy, you mind turning down the volume on that emergency frequency? It's overriding our internal comms, and I've got my chief engineer trying to calibrate the localized gravity anchors. It's hard to hear over all the crying.
Zyler stared at the screen, his mind struggling to bridge the gap between the apocalyptic horror outside his window and the casual indifference of this human.
Human Captain,
Zyler shouted, his voice cracking with urgency.
You are in the immediate kill zone of a Void Weaver. It has just decimated our entire third fleet. Your vessel has no energy deflector shields. You are flying a civilian cargo ship into the mouth of a living god. Turn back. Flee.
Captain Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't even look up from his tablet. He just tapped the screen again, sighed, and took another sip of coffee.
Yeah, I saw the scrap metal floating around out there. Shame about your dreadnoughts. Pretty sleek design, but way too much budget spent on aesthetics, not enough on structural redundancy.
Marcus muttered.
But look, we can't turn back. Our corporate quarterly taxes are due next Tuesday at midnight, Earth Standard Time. My fuel subcontractors in the Orion Arm just jacked up their antimatter prices by 15%, and if I don't show my crew a profit-sharing bonus check by the end of the shift, the union is going to strike and lock me out of my own bridge.
Marcus finally looked up, his tired eyes fixing onto Zyler with a chillingly practical intensity.
We didn't come here to fight a god, Admiral. We came here because our long-range spectroscanners indicate that specific anomaly is composed of 82% pure, unrefined, hyperdense platinum iridium matrix. Do you have any idea what the current market value per metric ton is for iridium in the Sol sector right now?
Zyler's mandibles went slack.
You came to harvest it?
We came to balance our books.
Marcus corrected him, turning away from the comms console. He flicked a switch on his master deck, his voice echoing across his own ship's loudspeaker.
All right, crew, listen up. We've got a massive pile of free money floating right ahead of us, but it's currently biting the locals. Let's get the standard extraction sequence rolling. No overtime today, folks. We do this clean, we do it fast, and we get home in time for the weekend. Deploy the anchors.
Act 3, Phase 1, Breaking the Crust. On the view screen of Aegis Prime, the Ouroboros began to move. It did not dance through space like a fighter, nor did it maintain a strategic standoff distance like the alien dreadnoughts. It burned its massive rear thrusters, accelerating straight toward the swirling, terrifying mass of the Void Weaver.
They are insane.
The Voltaic subcommander whispered, his hands trembling as he tracked the telemetry.
The gravitational pull alone will rip their hull apart.
The Void Weaver felt the approach of the massive steel interloper. The ancient entity shifted its mass, the black, oily folds of its skin rippling as it pulled its attention away from the dying star. A massive, glowing eye-like cluster of pure thermonuclear energy opened along its central ridge. It focused on the Ouroboros. A second later, the monster unleashed a continent-spanning wave of bioplasma. It was a blinding, violet beam of pure destruction, roaring through space at near-light speed. It hit the Ouroboros' dead center. The alien command bridge erupted in gasps.
Direct hit. They are gone.
But as the blinding light of the plasma blast dissipated, the Ouroboros emerged from the fire. The front of the human ship was glowing a dull, angry orange, but the thick, multi-layered slabs of industrial blast plating had absorbed the heat. Massive cooling vents along the ship's spine opened, venting thousands of tons of superheated steam into the vacuum of space, creating a beautiful, artificial nebula around the vessel. Over the open radio channel, Zyler could hear Captain Marcus yelling into a megaphone on his bridge.
Damn it, Kevin. I told you to angle the secondary deflector plating by 3 degrees. Look at that scorching. That plasma residue is going to take our maintenance drones 3 shifts to scrape off, and I am not approving budget for automated hull detailing. Watch the paint job, or it's coming out of your paycheck.
The human hull. It didn't fracture.
Zyler stammered, staring at his sensors.
How is that possible? Our shields were bypassed completely.
It's not energy shielding, Admiral.
The sensor officer said, his voice filled with a sudden, growing awe.
The humans aren't using plasma fields. Their armor is a hypercompressed alloy of solid carbon nanotubes and depleted uranium, layered with liquid coolant channels. They aren't deflecting the energy, they are literally just absorbing it and sweating it out into space.
Get us into pocket range.
Marcus's voice boomed over the comms.
Drop the localized gravity anchors. Pin this slippery bastard down.
The Ouroboros fired 8 massive, crude-looking harpoons from its forward bays. They weren't weapons. They were kilometer-long spikes of solid tungsten, trailing thick, braided cables of hypertensile steel. The spikes slammed into the rocky, armored outer hide of the Void Weaver, burying themselves deep into the creature's ancient flesh. Instantly, the human ship engaged its gravity anchors, localized, inverted mass generators that increased the effective weight of the Ouroboros by a factor of 10,000. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. The Void Weaver, an entity that had drifted freely through the galactic void for eras, suddenly found itself violently yanked to a halt. The cables tautened, groaning under the immense strain, but they did not snap. The cosmic horror was trapped, chained to a giant, stubborn block of human steel.
Phase 1 complete.
A human voice shouted over the radio.
Bring up the primary drills. Let's crack this nut open.
For massive structures, each the size of a voltaic city ship, rotated out from the underbelly of the Ouroboros. They were the primary excavation drills, massive, diamond-tipped, plasma-shrouded boring screws designed to grind through the crust of dead planets to reach their cores. The drills began to spin, their magnetic engines generating a low, terrifying hum that registered on Aegis Prime's acoustic sensors. The human ship surged forward, driving the rotating plasma screws directly into the upper mantle of the Void Weaver's armored hide. The cosmic monster let out a psychic shriek. It wasn't a sound, but a violent wave of mental agony that washed across the system, causing the alien officers on the station to grip their heads in pain. The entity flailed its massive, moon-sized tentacles, slamming them repeatedly against the side of the Ouroboros. Each strike from the tentacles carried enough kinetic energy to crack a tectonic plate. The human ship shook violently, the metal groaning, alarm lights flashing yellow across its massive frame. But the humans didn't retreat.
Keep drilling.
Marcus roared over the comms, the sound of rattling coffee cups audible in the background.
We've already spent 3,000 credits on fuel just getting into this position. If we back out now, we're running a deficit. Drive those bits home.
The plasma drills chewed through the ancient, calcified armor of the beast, sending millions of tons of shattered biometal, glowing crystalline structures, and frozen, pressurized fluids erupting into space like a volcanic plume. The outer shell of the god was breaking. Act 4, Phase 2, the parasite swarm. Realizing its physical mass was being violently breached, the Void Weaver triggered its biological defense mechanisms. Across the deep, cratered valleys of its skin, thousands of smaller pods ruptured. Out poured the hive mites, millions of chitinous, dog-sized biodrones that lived symbiotically within the entity, They were the creatures the Void Weaver used to scour the surfaces of conquered worlds, cleansing them of intelligent life. They moved through the void like a shifting, black cloud of locusts, their mandibles vibrating at frequencies that could shear through titanium armor.
The parasite swarm.
The Voltaic subcommander yelled.
Admiral, the humans are going to be swarmed. When those creatures breach the hull seals, they will consume the crew alive. That is how the colony of Thrax fell.
On the view screen, the massive black cloud of millions of biodrones enveloped the Ouroboros, completely obscuring the silver and rust steel of the ship from view. It looked like a living carpet of teeth and claws was digesting the vessel. Inside Aegis Prime, the officers held their breath. Xyler reached for the comms control, preparing to offer his condolences to the dying crew.
Captain Marcus, do you copy? We are deploying our remaining starfighters to assist, though their fuel is low.
What? No, don't waste your gas, Admiral.
Marcus's voice cut back in, sounding more annoyed than frightened.
We deal with planetary locusts and asteroid ticks all the time on the mining routes. This is just a standard biological infestation. Hey, Sarah. Activate the pest control protocols. Turn on the external arc heaters.
The Ouroboros didn't deploy anti-aircraft turrets or missile batteries. Instead, the entire outer hull of the human ship began to glow with a brilliant, crackling blue energy. The humans had wired their ship's massive, industrial nuclear reactors directly into the physical steel of the hull plating, transforming the entire multi-kilometer vessel into a giant, cosmic bug zapper. The moment the hive mites attempted to chew through the outer plates, millions of volts of raw, unmodulated electrical current arched through the swarm. The void was lit by a continuous, blinding cascade of static electricity. The biodrones didn't just die, they exploded. The high-voltage arcs cooked their pressurized internal organs instantly, turning the terrifying swarm into a massive, expanding cloud of harmless, charred biological ash. Millions of the nightmare creatures were vaporized in a matter of minutes, swept away by the solar winds like dust bunnies before a broom.
Pest control complete.
The human radio reported casually.
Drills have breached the inner core chamber. We've reached the payout zone, Captain.
Excellent.
Marcus replied.
Bring out the automated haulers. Let's start stripping the high-grade material before the core destabilizes.
Act V, Phase 3, the glazing of Aegis Prime. The alien officers on Aegis Prime were no longer tracking the evacuation numbers. They were no longer looking at the jump gate coordinates. The entire command staff, from the highest general to the lowest logistics clerk, was standing flat against the transparent viewports, their eyes wide, their minds completely paralyzed by the display of casual, industrial violence taking place before them. They were watching a god be processed. Massive, automated excavators, looking like giant, open-jawed steel skulls attached to hydraulic crane arms, swung out from the interior cargo bays of the Ouroboros. They plunged deep into the bleeding, glowing inner core of the Void Weaver. Every time the excavators pulled back, they carried multi-ton chunks of glowing, iridescent crystal and hyperdense, metallic flesh. These materials were dropped into a massive, spinning funnel on the top of the human ship, the primary intake of an onboard industrial foundry. From the rear of the Ouroboros, the output of that foundry began to emerge. Massive, automated stamping presses slammed down with rhythmic, mechanical thuds that sent vibrations through the local space-time fabric. Clang, clang, clang. With every strike of the press, a perfectly neat, rectangular, barcode pallet of solid, gleaming platinum iridium alloy was pushed out into the cargo stabilization grid. Each pallet was stamped with a corporate tracking number and a human recycling symbol.
They are barcoding it.
The Voltaic subcommander whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of sheer terror and absolute, religious awe.
They are slicing the flesh of an immortal cosmic horror, running it through a factory, and putting a price tag on it.
This isn't a battle.
Grand Admiral Xyler said, his voice barely a breath. His hands rested on the command console, completely forgotten.
We mobilized 3 fleets. We prayed to our creators. We accepted our extinction. And the humans, they brought a manifest. They brought a budget spreadsheet. Look at them. They aren't even aiming for its vital organs. They are just cutting along the lines of the highest mineral density.
On the tactical map, the Void Weaver's energy signatures were plummeting. The creature was no longer radiating terrifying cosmic authority. It was flailing weakly, its internal thermonuclear core leaking into space as the human drills systematically dismantled its primary energy-routing organs. The entity tried one final, desperate act of defiance. It gathered the remaining energy from the dying star Xylos B, attempting to trigger a localized supernova that would take the system, and its tormentors, with it. The space around the entity began to warp violently, white-hot light blinding the sensors.
Warning.
The station's AI chimed.
Hyperspatial collapse imminent. The entity is detonating its life core.
Captain Marcus,
Xyler screamed into the radio.
get out of there. It's going to detonate. It will take the entire inner system with it.
On the screen, Marcus looked out his bridge window at the blinding white light. He sighed, checked his watch, and clicked his tongue.
Yup, she's trying to pop her core. That would ruin the purity of the iridium alloy if it melts prematurely.
Marcus said calmly.
Tommy, drop the cryo-coolant lines into the main breach. Let's freeze this asset.
Two massive, flexible conduits, each the thickness of a highway, slid out from the Ouroboros. They plunged deep into the glowing, white-hot heart of the Void Weaver. Instantly, the humans began pumping millions of gallons of liquid nitrogen and stabilized absolute zero cryofluid directly into the creature's thermonuclear engine. The effect was like throwing a bucket of ice water into a blast furnace. The blinding white light sputtered. The expanding energy field stalled. The cosmic horror's core violently contracted, turning from a blinding star white to a dull, crackling blue, and then finally to a solid, frozen, lifeless black. The Void Weaver's massive, moon-sized eye cluster went dark. The flailing tentacles stiffened, covered in thick sheets of space ice. The ancient devourer of worlds, the nightmare of 100 civilizations, was dead. The entire system went dead silent. The remaining civilian ships stopped their flight. The alien soldiers on the front lines dropped their weapons. A cosmic silence settled over the Xylos system, broken only by the rhythmic, distant echo of the human ship's cargo presses. Clang, clang, clang. Another row of platinum pallets was neatly stacked and secured. Act 6, the ultimate jerry-rig. Grand Admiral Xyler wiped a bead of cold sweat from his upper brow. He gripped the comms microphone with hands that would not stop shaking.
Captain Marcus,
Xyler said, his voice cracking with an emotion that was part profound gratitude and part primal, survivalist terror.
It is over. You have slain the Devourer. You have saved 40 million lives. The Galactic Coalition will build monuments to your name. We will carve your face into the moons of our capital world. You have harvested a wealth that could fund our sector for a century. Surely your cargo bays are full now? You will return to Earth as kings.
On the screen, Marcus was no longer looking at his tablet. He had walked over to the viewport of his bridge, looking out at the massive, hollowed-out, 3,000-kilometer frozen carcass of the dead space god drifting in the twilight of Xylos B. He didn't look triumphant. He looked greedy. A strange, terrifyingly ambitious glint had appeared in his tired, bloodshot eyes.
Well, see, Admiral, that's the thing.
Marcus said, tapping his chin with his stylus.
The cargo bays are technically at 100% capacity with the processed iridium pallets. We literally can't fit another bar inside the internal hold.
Xyler let out a sigh of relief.
Then you are finished.
But
Marcus continued, pointing a finger at the giant, frozen corpse outside.
leaving the rest of that organic shell out here? That's just bad business. That's leaving money on the table. The outer hide could be processed into heavy-duty radiation shielding for deep space colonies. The spinal column is composed of high-tensile carbon nanotube fibers that would fetch a fortune in the shipyard grids. And honestly, the local bioluminescent fluid leaking out of its secondary glands? If we filter that, add some sugar, and put a cool logo on the bottle, we could market it as a premium energy drink to corporate workers back in Seoul. We'd make a killing.
Xyler blinked his primary and secondary eyes in rapid succession.
But you just said your ship cannot hold any more weight. You have no physical space left.
Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh, a terrifying sound that made the alien command staff flinch.
We're humans, Admiral. We don't need cargo space when we've got a garage full of spare parts and a crew that wants to go home.
Marcus flicked his comms over to the engineering deck.
All right, crew, listen up. Change of plans. We're not leaving any scraps for the scavengers. Pull out the heavy towing cables. I want the primary plasma welders deployed on the exterior hull. We're going to jerry-rig this big bastard.
What followed over the next 2 hours was a spectacle of engineering madness that would be studied in the Galactic War Academy for the next 5 centuries. The crew of the Ouroboros didn't pack up their gear. Instead, hundreds of humans in heavy, bulky industrial spacesuits poured out of the ship's airlocks like an army of ants. They weren't armed with rifles, they were armed with heavy-duty plasma torches, steel cables the thickness of skyscrapers, and spare, uncalibrated booster rockets that looked like they had been salvaged from an old scrapyard. The aliens watched in absolute, horrified fascination as the humans began to literally weld the dead cosmic god directly to the rear bumper of their own ship. They dragged kilometer-long steel cables around the frozen, skull-like crown of the Void Weaver, knotting them into crude, massive loops before securing them to the Ouroboros' primary structural frame. They took 4 spare, auxiliary nuclear thruster blocks from their cargo hold and literally bolted them directly into the flesh of the monster's severed tentacles, running crude external fuel lines from their main ship directly into the improvised rocket pods. They were turning an ancient, apocalyptic deity into a giant, macabre cargo train.
They are crazy.
The voltaic sensor officer whispered, tears of sheer bewilderment forming in his eyes.
They are attaching a space god to their ship with towing straps. If those cables snap during warp travel, the localized spatial rift will tear their ship in half.
They don't care.
Xyler said, his voice entirely deadpan.
Look at them. They are checking the tension of the ropes. One of the humans just kicked the monster's skull to see if it was secure.
On the view screen, a human astronaut in a grease-stained space suit could indeed be seen floating near the massive, frozen eye socket of the dead deity. The human gave the massive tungsten cable a solid tug, turned back toward the ship's bridge, and gave a sharp, definitive thumbs up. Marcus's face reappeared on the primary hololith. He looked slightly more relaxed now, the bags under his eyes seemingly lighter now that the profit margins had doubled. He took a final, satisfying gulp of his cheap coffee.
All right, Aegis Command. We're all hooked up and ready to haul.
Marcus said with a polite nod.
The boosters are calibrated, the structural cables are nice and tight, and we're within our weight-to-thrust safety margin by about 2%. Which is plenty.
Xyler swallowed hard.
Captain Marcus, the Galactic Coalition cannot thank you enough. But please, be careful. If that trailer detaches in hyperspace.
It'll be fine. Tommy used a double hitch knot on the main lines. That thing isn't going anywhere.
Marcus waved his hand dismissively.
Anyway, we've gotta fly. If we don't clear the system jump gate in the next 10 minutes, we're going to hit peak traffic in the Orion transit lane, and I'm not sitting in a 3-hour slipspace jam with a dead god attached to my bumper.
The human captain smiled, a warm, terrifyingly casual expression.
If any more ancient, immortal devourers of worlds wander into your sector and start breaking your stuff, drop Soul Salvage a line. Here's our corporate frequency code. We give a 10% discount for first-time client referrals, and if you leave a 5-star review on the Galactic Business Network, we'll throw in a free crate of that energy drink once we get the factory line running.
Marcus gave a casual, 2-finger salute.
Take care, buddy. Watch out for those taxes.
The channel cut to static. On the main viewport of Aegis Prime, the massive, blocky shape of the Ouroboros ignited its primary rear thrusters. The brilliant blue light of its engines illuminated the dark system. A second later, the auxiliary rockets welded into the dead flesh of the Void Weaver sparked to life with a violent, chaotic roar. The human industrial ship surged forward into the dark, dragging the 3,000-kilometer, frozen, hollowed-out carcass of the galaxy's greatest nightmare behind it. The massive cables tautened, the frozen corpse groaned, and with a sudden, brilliant flash of folding space-time, both the ship and its terrifying cargo vanished into the slipspace lane, heading back toward Earth. Inside the command hub of Aegis Prime, Grand Admiral Xyler slowly sat down in his command chair. He looked at his hands, then at the empty tactical map, and finally at the distant, quiet star of Xylos B, which was slowly stabilizing now that its predator was gone. The entire alien high command remained silent, the silence stretching on for several minutes as they tried to process the reality of what they had just witnessed. Finally, the subcommander turned to Xyler, his voice shaking.
Admiral, what do we do now?
Xyler stared blankly into the empty void where a god had just been turned into corporate inventory.
Cancel Protocol Omega.
Xyler whispered.
And send an immediate, classified directive to the High Council. Tell them to revise our military doctrines. Tell them to dismantle our superweapons. And above all, tell them to ensure we never, under any circumstances, default on a financial payment to the humans.
Xyler let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for an eternity.
Because the most terrifying thing in this universe isn't a monster that wants to eat your stars. It is a species that looks at an apocalypse and calculates the shipping and handling fees.